Thanks for coming, everyone. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this beautiful land, the Composting people and their elders past and present. Pay my respects and extend that respect to other Indigenous people present. And I'm really glad that we can all come together during this conference to think about some of the big issues that are affecting our country and the world. And the Community Composting Hubs initiative, I feel, is a sort of a local approach to some of the biggest issues that we have now. So, as we all know, and it's been said about a million times during this conference, that so much organic waste is going into the average bin, and this is the average Brisbane bin, but it's pretty much the same around the country, that more than 50% of that general waste could have been composted. So the Community Composting Hubs program aims to divert a lot of that organic waste from landfill and to value organic waste, food waste in particular, as a valuable resource and to convert that into that valuable resource being compost. Also to provide an opportunity to educate local residents about composting, but also about just closing the loop between their food scraps that they create in the kitchen back into the soil to grow more food. And also as a tool to educate the general public about composting in general. The other sort of main aim is to increase community connections as well. And that's, even though that's not the waste objective, but that's the sort of social objective. But it feeds back into creating better waste outcomes in the city. And also, Community Composting Hubs has the effect of raising the profile of community gardens in general. Community gardens are really great community resources, and a lot of people aren't really aware of them even being in their neighbourhood or how they can get involved or what they're about, really. So the aim is to sort of link in people with local community gardens. And of course, to provide training and work opportunities. In terms of just purely sort of managing organic waste, centralised composting or sort of curbside collection of food, FOGO, is a really good way to divert organic waste from landfill. But in terms of actually returning that material to the soil at a local level, home and community composting sort of encourages that more so. So, as you know, Australian soils are very poor, and there's not very much organic matter in Australian soils. But by people composting at home and putting that compost straight back into the soil, that's helping to improve Australian soils, and at a community level as well. That sort of has the added effect of improving the soils and its ability to grow local food, but also to help sequester carbon. There's a few, we could break it up into two types of community composting hubs that we have in Brisbane. So most of them are what we call sort of public ones. That is, that they can be accessed by the general public, and they're located in community spaces, mostly in community gardens, but also like community centres or environment centres. So it means that anybody can go and use that community composting hub. It's maintained by the volunteers at those sites and also used by the volunteers at the site. The private community compost hubs are held in places like retirement homes or schools or MUDs, and that they can only be accessed by the people that are part of that community. So, for example, if a school has a community composting hub, it's only accessible by the school kids, the staff, and the families of that school, so they can bring their scraps to the hub, and that's used in the school. The same with if there's an apartment block with a community composting hub, that's only available for the residents of that apartment block. How it works is the first thing that people do is to register. We have like an online registration form, and then once they've registered, they can go and collect their free kitchen caddy, which looks like that, and that's been surprisingly popular with residents. We explain that they don't have to have that; they can use an ice cream container or something. But if they want to, they can go and collect the kitchen caddy to take their scraps from their home to the community composting hub. They go and collect it from the ward office, and we encourage them to then bring their fruit and vegetable scraps down to the community composting hub, where they add their material. And at the same time as they add their food scrap material, they also add some carbon material, which is provided there. So they're getting a sense of that carbon-nitrogen balance without realising that they're learning that. Then that's turned into compost, which is then used in the garden. And it sort of provides that sort of public display of that cycle. As of coming this Sunday, we will have 22 public community composting hubs around the city. We've tried to locate them in far and wide around the city because the more the merrier, and so that more people can access or see these hubs. And that doesn't include the private ones, so that doesn't include the schools or retirement homes or MUDs. Most of the community composting hubs are in community gardens, as I said. And we've got approximately 5,000 residents now registered to participate. So 5,000 households, that is, bringing their food scraps to the community composting hubs. There's sort of a little bit of variation in the hubs themselves. A lot of them are in high density areas, but some of them are in quite sort of spread out suburban areas. Some of them are really popular and get loads and loads of stuff coming in, and others not so much. So it's a fair amount of variation. Every time we start a new hub, we set a launch date and we have a public welcome day. And that's where we invite the local residents to come out and sort of come to the garden, have a look at the setup, register, get their free caddy, and also just learn how it works. So on that day, leading up to the day, we actually do a letterbox drop to all the residents, 1 or 2 kilometres radius of the hub. It depends on how dense the population is. If it's very dense, it's only a 1 kilometre radius, or if it's suburban, it's sort of more of 2 kilometre radius. And that invites people to come on that particular day to find out how it works. So we provide some morning tea, and we have some colouring in for kids about compost, and we have displays about organic recycling generally. And at the time we sort of physically say, look, you bring your scraps here and you put it in here and then you do this, so that it helps people. A lot of people who join up with this have never had anything to do with composting before, and a lot of them are actually a bit afraid of it and afraid of the bugs and the whole thing. So, it's sort of like really holding hands to dip their toe in the idea of composting. Because what we've found is that a lot of times people who have never composted before start bringing their scraps to the community composting hubs. And in that process, they sort of, they're observing what's going on. They see the compost change over time, and sometimes they see the community gardeners using the compost. And so they're sort of learning in a very informal way about how composting works. And then I often find after about a year or so, I sometimes get feedback from people saying that they've decided to try it at home themselves too. So it's sort of a very slow, easy introduction to composting. We try to, usually it's launched by a local councillor, but not always. We try to make a fun thing. We also encourage the community garden to do tours of the garden, or maybe put on a sausage sizzle or some sort of fundraising for them, and that way they try and get more people involved in the community garden as well. With the registration form, we ask people to describe what they imagine that they will find difficult about participating in this process, and also what they're thinking that they're going to get out of it. And in that way we try and map some of their perceived barriers and benefits to the program, and that helps us design the program or improve the program to make it easier for people and to really build on their motivations as well. We also get their contact details so that if we need to let them know, like occasionally we have to send out things saying, just a reminder to chop up your, apples, don't put whole apples in and stuff like that. Also we tell people not to put in compostable bags, because at this type of composting, it takes forever, it just turns into a slimy thing in the bottom of the compost, and it can also be confused for a plastic bag. So we ask people not to use compostable bags for this type of composting. So we sort of have to communicate with people every now and then for updates, and when we ask for their contact details, we ask for their permission to contact them as well. So in terms of the barriers, the perceived barriers, this is before they start, of course. Mostly, time and time again, people just find that they can imagine that they're going to find it hard to find the time to get down to the community garden with their scraps to deliver it. That's almost half of the people. But I was interested that, more than a quarter sort of quite vehemently said, no, there'll be no problem, there'll be no issues at all. And they were really confident that they were going to find it easy. With the motivations or the benefits, overwhelmingly for environmental reasons, people have decided to do this. A lot of people anecdotally have said to me, they just felt so terrible throwing their food scraps in the bin, and they're excited that they can not do that, basically. And also they're keen to support the local community garden. A UQ student has done some follow-up research last year, and he sort of compared these initial, what people initially said would be their barriers and benefits, to how they feel about it, 2 years on. And generally things haven't changed much. So basically the same issues are there and the same benefits are there. When we get a new community garden coming on, or a new hub coming on, we have to make sure that there's enough volunteers to be able to look after it, and that the site is able to be accessed 24/7 in case somebody wants to compost at 3 a.m, and also that there's a use for that finished compost once it's been made. We provide training, so we train up the community gardeners in composting, and we also provide the bins themselves, the aerators, signage and promotion, and of course those caddies to any registered participants. So initially we generally start the gardens off with the black Dalek bins, and we put some mouse mesh underneath and attach that to stop rats getting in, and a brown wheelie bin for the carbon material. But for some of the gardens that have become really receiving a lot of material, we've moved on to the bays, and this is made by a husband and wife small business. They create them out of recycled pallets, and they line them also with mouse mesh to stop rats getting in. And this just sort of means they can handle more material, and it also builds up more heat and processes it quicker. For the signage, we put on top of the lids hungry and full sign, so that people know which compost bin to put their stuff in. And then it's because the bins are the same size, once one is full, it's easier to just swap the lids over, so we don't have to unpeel the sign or anything. And at the compost hub itself, there's a little sign explaining what to do, what can go in and all that kind of thing, and reminding them to put their carbon material in at the same time. For MUDs or apartment blocks, the requirements for that are that obviously the body corporate has to agree and that they have some end use for it, so ideally a community garden, and that the majority of residents are on board with it. For private community composting hubs, we still provide training and signage and the caddies to the people who participate, but we don't provide the actual infrastructure. They have to purchase that themselves. And it's a similar setup for schools and retirement homes and things like that. That's a retirement home. We were just setting that one up at the time. There's been plenty of issues and challenges along the way, and one of them being a victim of its own success. So many people have signed up that some of the hubs have become overwhelmed with the amount of material coming, and also struggling to get enough volunteers to manage that. There has been some contamination, but not as much as I expected. There's been 1 or 2 nappies, a couple of plastic bags, but generally I'm amazed actually how little contamination there really has been, which is interesting. Also, just keeping up the carbon supply for the gardens. We've sort of tried to coordinate with other parts of councils to get wood chips delivered regularly, and also getting some sugarcane mulch delivered every now and then to help out with that. Also, come August this year, we're going to be running a Master Composters training course, and that will be a intensive sort of high-level composting training for people who want to take their composting skills to the next level. It'll be over 4 weeks, 3 hours, so every Thursday for 3 hours, and the people, the participants in that have to come to all of those sessions, and at the end of it they have to give back 40 hours of volunteer work, something to do with composting in the community, and we'll encourage people to get involved in the community composting hubs, but it could be at their local school or wherever. Okay. We've also subcontracted, 3 minutes, thanks, subcontracted some of the labour. So the small business who collect organic material from houses and things have been subcontracted to help us out with some of that maintenance to support the community gardens. And they've also further sort of subcontracted to one of the people at the one of the community gardens to pay him 4 hours a week to do what he was doing, because he was really working very hard. I find that's a really nice way to go, because a lot of people connected with community gardens have mental health issues or injuries or disabilities, and being able to provide a little bit of employment is really nice. And it tends to be enough that they can still stay on a benefit, but just get a little bit of, it's more of an acknowledgement too of the hard work that they're doing. Also, in terms of, there's opportunities for small enterprise. For example, one of the community gardeners would like to set himself up with a bicycle and a trailer and go around to the local cafes collecting coffee grounds and just charging them a small fee to bring back to compost. So those types of things, I think, will help with that process as well. We also, every year, either throw a birthday party, like a Community Compost Hub's birthday party or Christmas party to celebrate the work of the volunteers, and, you know, a nice lunch and acknowledgement certificate, goodie bag, whatever, to make them feel valued, because what they're doing, all that volunteer work, is really doing a lot for our organic waste in Brisbane. Also, just quickly, as a result of the conference over the last couple of days, I've sort of come up with a few things that I've picked up from people in terms of how I can sort of go back and have a look at this program to improve it. And one of the things is to engage with the local Aboriginal people. because, you know, this is all about caring for country and connecting to place. And also to create more connections with other groups like Oz Harvest or other not-for-profit groups. And to support the development of umbrella community groups like the woman who was talking about plastic-free Bondi. I don't know if she's here, but you know, setting up some sort of community group that can really drive the whole community composting hubs, and then it would be sort of something that we could just support back a little bit. Also, I liked Valentina Petrova's talk on the Strata Community Gardens. She mentioned, training for the building managers at MUDs, and I think that's a great idea too. So that's that, and just wondering if anyone has any questions or comments.